If you manage content for multiple clients, there's a moment every agency owner dreads. A client runs out of content and nobody saw it coming. There is no shoot booked and there was no warning sent. This video is how we make sure this never happens again. We're going to build a fully automated content health monitor that tracks how many weeks of approved content is left for each client. It color codes every client into red, amber or green and fires off an alert if somebody reaches a critical level and has no shoot booked. We will build 5 automations in total to wrap this up into one system that lets you manage all of your clients in one place. So for example, if I change the posts per week here to 2, it should automatically change how this gets processed. So that should get rid of the alerts and checkbox here, which it has done. We then want to run the count, and that should hopefully change the... Yes, you can see this is now amber. You can see it's got 2.5 weeks of content left. It would also work if we change how many pieces of approved content they've got, right? I can move all of this. So let's say this goes to production. So now we only have 2 pieces of content. We can run the count again. And you can see this changes to red. It changes the amount of content left. And it fires off an alert. Once this is all done, you will never have to think about this again. Let's build. Just before I dive into building everything, I also wanted to mention that I'm going to leave a full blueprint for how to build this in the description of the video. So make sure you grab it after you watch this video so that you can build your own. We are going to build this using 3 simple tools. ClickUp, which is a project management software, Make.com, which is where we will build all of the automations, and then Google Calendar, which I hope you are familiar with. This is basically where you will track your client shoots. To ensure you've got everything you need for this to fully work, you will need some subscriptions. For example, for ClickUp, you will need the business plan, which costs about $19 a month. In Make.com, you can build this without any subscription and for free, but if you want to run this on a daily basis and you've got lots of clients, you will probably have to pay for the core tier, which is about $9 a month. Let me quickly go over the structure in ClickUp in case we have never used this before and are seeing it for the first time. So everything is organized within a workspace. The workspace can essentially be your entire organization. The next level down is spaces. You can think of spaces as kind of departments or key areas of the business. So for example, I've got here sales, HR, content. So we will create a separate space just for this. Within the space, you then have folders and lists. You can choose to skip folders altogether if you want to, completely up to you. I have gone with the folder setup here just because I think it allows you to drop in additional information about each client. For example, their brand pillars or any other documents you might want to reference. So it may be useful to keep everything nice and tidy. Outside of these client tools, we will have one list, which is the master health list. The coloring logic I'm going to use here is if a client has more than 4 weeks of content left, we will mark them green. If they've got around 2 to 3 weeks of content left, we will mark them amber. And if they've got less than that, we will mark them red. If they are red and they also don't have next shoot date, it will fire off an alert, which can be a Slack or a Gmail. Just trying to keep it simple here, but you can go crazy with these automations. Let me give you a quick overview of the automations we will build. So there is 5 in total, and we will experiment with multiple modules and multiple ways of setting these up. Some of these will be scheduled, some of these will be triggered on the go, so you will get a full exposure to what it is like building a scenario in Make. The first automation, and I'm talking now chronologically in what order they will run on a day-to-day basis. The first one will be past shoots cleanse. So this essentially says if a shoot has happened in a date that is now gone, that has happened, let's remove it from the client line. The second one will be calendar sync. So we will go through your calendar and scrape any upcoming shoots. I will limit this to the next 30 days, but you can set this up as you wish. The one thing I have to point out at this point is this is the one thing where you have to be careful. Is the naming convention, and I will highlight this in multiple points throughout the video, but you just need to make sure that you follow the right naming convention throughout, otherwise the scraping won't really work. The third automation, and that's the big one, is counting the amount of approved and pre-scheduled content, and based on that updating the client status to red, amber or green. If it is red and there is no shoot booked, it fires off the red alert, so that's a separate automation. That's number 4. And the final one will be a nightly reset. So when everything is done, we want at midnight to reset everything. So for example, there will be a checkbox to say we have already sent an alert, so that we don't send multiple alerts during one day, but we do want to reset this so that it can be sent again tomorrow. You can see that the order here matters, because firstly you need to cleanse the past shoots so that you can update it with new ones, for example. Or you don't want to fire off the red alert before you've done your syncing, because maybe you have scheduled a new shoot yesterday and it wouldn't be updated. So the order is designed to work properly. So let's set up a new space and everything we need in ClickUp. I'm going to start fresh here. So let's do new space. I'm going to call this content/tutorial, and we can continue. Define your workflow you can do here, but it doesn't really matter. I'm just going to choose project management. The one thing I will change is the task statuses. So I want this to follow a natural pipeline of a piece of content. So I'm going to rename these statuses so that it kind of makes sense. I think this is a bit more logical. You go from idea to production, review, approved, pre-scheduled, and posted. I'm going to apply these changes and create this space. And now you can see within my space, I have already a pre-created list. Within the list, you can see there's already a task. So in ClickUp, everything is all around lists and tasks. Here, it doesn't matter whether you're talking about a piece of content or client, the list will define what it actually is, but every line is always a task. It's similar to Notion. If you are familiar with Notion, everything is a page. So here, everything is a task. Let's rename this list, and this will be our master content health dashboard. So let's call it that. So here, every single task will be a different client. But firstly, we want to set these fields properly. So I'm going to keep the name because it will be the name of the client, but I'm going to hide all of these preset fields because I don't really want to use any of them. I want to set up my own. So what I'm going to do is, firstly, I want to set up an account manager because surely every client has one. So here you can see a list of fields that we can either add from existing, but in this instance, we are creating new ones. So I'm going to look for people, and I'm going to call it account manager and create. You can see it gives you, well, it gives me this pop-up because I've already built this in my previous space. So it says I'm adding a duplicate, but that's fine. Next, I'm going to want to show how many posts per week the client wants. So that's going to be a number that you set yourself. Then we want to know how many pieces of content they have in the pipeline. Based on that, we can calculate weeks of content left. And when we've got weeks of content left, we can set up the health of the client. So this will be a drop-down field, and I will call this content health, and I will do a very simple red, amber, green, and you can set the colors of these options so that they correspond. I will also want to capture the next shoot date. So this will be a date, next shoot date. So this will not capture all of your future shoots. It will capture just the next upcoming one, which I think is all you really need to see here. And finally, we're going to add 2 checkboxes. So the first one will be called shoot booked, and the second one will be alert sent. So like I mentioned in the automations, we will want to be able to differentiate which ones we have already triggered the warning for. I'm going to add in a couple of clients just so that we've got something to play with here. And you can see they are all just stacked one on top of each other, which doesn't look that great. So what I want to do here is I want to change what it's grouping by. I want to group by, not by status, because we're not really using status in this particular list. What we want to group by is the content health. So let's do that. Now it has switched the status from here to here. I don't really want that, so I want to hide the status. And at the same time, I probably want to reorganize this a little bit. So let's bring the content health to the front. So that's the first thing we see. And I'm going to fill this in so that it serves as a basis for our automations. So you can see I dropped in some data. It doesn't really matter, it's just dummy data so that I've got something to play with in the automations. But you can see it's nicely grouped into red, amber, and green. The next thing we want to do is to set up the client content pipeline. So I'm going to create a new folder for our first client. And this is where the naming convention starts to kick in. You need to ensure that the folder name for the client is the same as the name on the list we just created. And I'm going to set up the fields that we will need for the content pipeline again. So firstly, let me rename this content. I don't want to see the assignee, I don't want the priority. I will keep the due date because we will essentially use the due date as our scheduled when we want to post a piece of content. The task is fine here. I want to see the stage. So let me edit so from existing. These are all the fields I already have in the system, and I can just trigger status. It's called status. Then I want to add some other pieces. So I'm gonna say content type, which can be a drop down. I'm going to add some options here. I'm also going to add the platform. So this will be another drop down. I'm going to add in a shoot date, which will essentially ask for which shoot this piece of content come from. This may be useful for you or not. We're not going to use it in the automation, so it's up to you whether you want to add it or not. And I'm also going to add a field for approved by. So this will be my people field again. And I'm again going to pre-fill this with some dummy data just so we can see what it looks like and we've got something to play with. So you can see I have filled this in with some data. Again, it doesn't really matter, it's made up, it's just so that we've got something to play with. Now let's finally start building these automations. I'm actually not going to go chronologically, and I will start with automation number 3, which is the most complex one, so I just want to get that out of the way. And also, it will be the building block for everything else, because it will count the amount of pre-approved pieces, it will set how many weeks we have left, it will set the red, amber, green status, and based off that we can build the other automations. So I'm in Make, I'm going to create a new scenario, and if you have never seen Make before, it's very simple, it's quite user-friendly, I would say. You've got these modules, which are a nice drag and drop feature, and you can very simply build a complex automation. You can see it integrates with loads and loads of apps. I have ClickUp at the top because I've recently built this automation, so that's the one I will be using as my first point. So the first thing I want to do is I want to list all the folders I've got in my content space, which in other words means list all of the clients I am managing. So I'm going to go into ClickUp, and here you can see all of these functions it can do. What I'm essentially looking for is under folder, list all folders. Now, if you haven't used it with ClickUp before, you will need to add a connection. You can just click the add button here and follow the setup. That's quite simple to do. I have already used it before, so I have it pre-filled here. You can choose between map or select, and here I'm going to go with select. What this essentially allows you to do is it loads all of your data from your account, and you can just do drop-down selection, which is very simple. So there's only one workspace I've got. In the space, I want to select the one I just created, so content tutorial. And limit, I'm going to set this, I'm actually going to remove this because I don't really need to limit this. If you are running into some issues, maybe you are spending too much tokens or you are running some duplicates, then you might want to use this feature. But for now, I want to run it on everything I've got. So now I've got all of my clients. I want to count how many pieces of approved and pre-scheduled content they've got. So to do that, within the folder, we've got our list. I'm just going to remind you. So yeah, this is the folder for the client. This is the list. And within the list, we've got all of these, which I said are tasks. So what we need to do is we want to list all tasks. So I'm going to go ClickUp is the very first feature here, list all tasks. And in this instance, instead of mapping, I'm going to be selecting. Sorry, the other way around. I was selecting before, this time I will be mapping. Because I already know the list ID. The list ID comes from my previous module. So you can see it gives me all of these answers, and under lists, I can select the list ID. But I also want to apply some filters here because I don't want it to count all pieces of content. So under statuses, I'm just going to add 2 items, which will be approved and pre-scheduled. We have now listed all the pre-approved and pre-scheduled pieces of content, but we need to count them. So to count them, we will not be using a ClickUp anymore. We will use a built-in tool into Make. So it's under Tools. And what we are looking for is a numeric aggregator, which is right here. So the source module is the list all tasks that we have just put there. The function is count and the value is 1. So what I'm essentially saying is every task that comes through, count it as 1 and add them all together. So that's the content piece of this automation sorted. What I want to do next is to get the corresponding task in the content health master. So if I go to ClickUp, we want to go to the client content health monitor, and we want to get the correct task so that we are appending to the right client. But actually we want to get all of these. So in ClickUp, I'm going to use the same module again, which is list all tasks. But this time when I'm selecting, I will go into, again, the same workspace, same space, but then I will leave this as a folderless list because that's where the list lives. And you can see that's the one I'm looking for, Client Content Health Master. So this is the list where I want to get all the tasks from. Next, I will want to set up a variable for how many weeks of content we've got left, because that's something we actually haven't done before. And now that we've got the data from the master dashboard, we can do that. So again, I'm going to use something from the tools. This time I'm going to set a variable, and I'm going to call it weeks of content left. And the value will be calculated. So what I want to do is I want to take the result from this numeric aggregator, so that's this piece, and I want to do a math function, which is divide, and I want to divide it by the number of posts per week the client wants. So that will come from my module number 4. You can see the numbers here match. So from module number 4, and here I am looking for a custom field because those fields were not in there originally. It's something we created. And in custom fields, I've got posts per week. There you go. Boom. So this was essentially calculated. And I've just noticed I haven't been naming these modules, so let me do that before I start getting lost in them. I'm also going to name and save the scenario so that we don't lose our progress. So coming back to where I left off, I need to add a filter here, which I can do by clicking this wrench button. It automatically sets up a filter. And the condition I want to do here is I want to make sure that the client from the master dashboard matches the one from the lists. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to say from module number 4, I want the task name to equal to the folder name from the other module. Now that we've done all of that, we can actually start writing something into ClickUp. And to do that, we will use a module called edit, but we want the one that edits a task with custom fields, because that's what we are really focusing on here. I've selected the correct list, but for the task ID, I want to map this. And I want the task ID to match whatever we got from here. So task ID matches task ID. Now I want to scroll down and find the custom fields that we want to populate. So you can see the content health, you can see the posts per week, weeks of content left, and approved content count. So these two are easy because we have calculated and set the variables for those. So weeks of content left is this variable. Approved content count, that is the result from this one here. And the other thing we want to do is content health. And you can see I've got this drop down here, but I don't want to hard code it because I don't know what the answer is. So instead, I'm going to map this as well. And to map this, I can make this whatever I want. I will make this a formula, but there will be a bit of a twist to it. So firstly, I'm going to start with a simple if, and I'm going to say if weeks of content left is bigger than or equal to 4, then we want it to be green. I'm going to nest in another if, and I'm going to say if it's bigger than or equal to 2, it's amber. And otherwise it will be red. Looks correct, right? Well, no, this actually wouldn't work, because ClickUp doesn't know what green, amber or red means. Yes, we have used this as a string in there, ClickUp wouldn't recognize this. What it would recognize is if I set this to the index of the position of the dropdown. So if I can come back here, you can see we've got 3 options, red, amber, green, or empty obviously. And you could set this to the index number, so 0, 1, 2. However, if somebody reordered these, which you can do, if somebody reordered these, it would then stop working. So that's not very robust. What I'm going to do is make sure that this can't break. Essentially, what we want to get, we don't want the index, but we want the unique identifier of each of these options. And there is a way how we can get it from the scenario we just made. So I'm going to save this now, and I'm going to run it. It will fail on me on the last task, but that's on purpose. So you can see we got this error, and that's because it doesn't recognize the last figures. Where can we get the unique identifier from? Well, annoyingly, you can't get it from ClickUp, from the UI. It's just not really possible, or maybe I just haven't found the option. But I can get it from my modules here. So you can see when I've run the scenario, I get these bubbles on top of every single module that has run successfully. If I go to the one with the content health lines, you can see every client is a bundle. I'm going to look at one of them in detail. So I'm looking at Nike, but it doesn't really matter, they all follow the same structure. I am looking for the content health, so that will be in my custom fields. I will expand that. Now I need to find which one it is, which I think is going to be like 3 or 4. There we go, 4. Content health dropdown. And here, if I expand this further, I can see all the options. I can see red, I can see amber, and I can see green. And what is it I see above them? ID. So this is the unique identifier for each of these options. Essentially what you need to do is you need to copy this ID and replace it in the formula you had. So firstly, I'm going to take the red one, replace it here, and also make sure there are no quotes around it, because that wouldn't work. And do the same for amber and green. Now that I've made these changes, I'm going to run the scenario again, and you can see that it runs all the way to the end. Hopefully it doesn't fail on me. There we go, it's worked. And if I go back to ClickUp, you can see it's populated the fields for Apple. Obviously can't populate the other ones because there's no client folders for them. But this one has been populated. We've got 4 posts per week that we have preset. They've got 4 pieces of approved content, which means they've got 1 week of content left, which is why it's red, it's correct. I think it was red before, but if I change this to green and I run it again, we shall see it work. There you go, it's red again. So this is clearly working, which is great. Let's carry on. The next thing I'm going to show you is, okay, we've done this updating. What if there's a red client and we want to fire off the alert? So let's do that. And I'm actually not going to build it in the same automation. I'm going to create a different one and show you how you can link from one automation to another. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an HTTP request. I'm going to say make a request. No authentication needed. Essentially what we're going to do is we're going to fire a webhook. So this will be method post. URL we don't have at the moment, so we need to leave it empty. And I'm going to save that. Oh, okay. I can't. Okay. Let's just put something in there for now. Come on. There you go. I'm not actually going to run this. It's just that I wanted a placeholder. I will go back and I will start creating my second scenario. So if I go back here, create scenario, and this one will be triggered by webhook. So let's add a webhook module in, and I want this to be a custom webhook. So I'm going to do that. You can choose a pre-existing one, but obviously for this instance, I want to create a new one. So I'm going to go add, and I'm going to say red alert tutorial. I'm going to save that, and you can see it gives me the URL. So I can just copy that to clipboard, save that here, call this red alert, save, and go back to my previous scenario and put it in the URL. So what this is now saying is that it will send data to the URL that is being captured by my other automation. Now we want to send some data to it so that we can pass flawlessly from one automation to another. That's why we want to add some information here. So the body content type will be application/JSON, and this will be a JSON string. What I want to put into the body content are just some of the fields that we have captured in this automation, and I want to do this in JSON format. If you haven't done this before, don't worry, it's very simple. JSON format is very easy to understand. It's just one thing equals another, and I'm just going to type it out so that you can follow along. And with all of that done, we've got all the information that we want to pass to the next automation. I can save this, and I want to add another filter here, because I don't want every single result to go through, only the ones that are red. So I'm going to call this red only, and I'm going to say weeks of content left, which I have lost somewhere. There we go. Numeric operator will be less than 2. So yeah, if it's less than 2, it will then get passed on to the webhook. With this, we have pretty much finished this automation, but at the moment, you can see this clock here. It means it would be scheduled, so if I turn it on, it would run every 15 minutes. I can change this so that it's, for example, daily at 6 AM every morning, not activate, which is fine. But I think we want to take it a step further. So instead of that, I'm going to add in another step before this. I'm going to add another module, and I'm going to do a webhook again. And I'm going to create a new one again. Link this up. So you can see how this has changed from the clock to the flash. That means it will now be instant. I'm going to save that. And you can see this changes to immediately as data arrives. So where is the data for this one going to arrive from? Well, 2 places. Firstly, I'm going to set up an automation in Make that can act as my trigger. So this will essentially just be the HTTP to this URL with no authentication needed. And this time we are not passing any data through, so we can just leave it as it is. And here, I'm going to set this one to run daily at 6 AM. And with that, that's all I needed. But the main reason I wanted to create this webhook in my main automation is so that I can trigger it within ClickUp as well. In ClickUp, you can do some pretty cool automations. To get there, it's this little icon at the top right for automations, and I'm going to go there and manage automations. And let's add a new one. And what I want to do is, you can see there's loads of things you can use as a trigger. My trigger will be status changes, and I want to change from any status, that's fine, but I wanted to change to something that's either approved or pre-scheduled. So that's my trigger. So I'm essentially saying if somebody is working here and they have approved or scheduled a post, I want it to recount the pieces of content and weeks left and all of that. So if this happens, then the next step is going to be the action. And the action is going to be webhook. And for this, you need to create, you will probably not have the previous ones. I obviously have this from my previous build, but let's create a new one. We want to create a webhook. I'm going to call it Content Health Tutorial. You can describe it. I'm just going to paste in the URL. And with that, that's pretty much all of it done. So I can create this. And you can see we've got an active automation. So now if I go back to make, and I come here and I activate the scenario, it should be activated when I change some piece of content, right? So let's try that. Let's go into my content pipeline for Apple here. And let's change this one to pre-scheduled. If I go to make, if I go to the drop down here, I can see the scenario runs, and you can see it ran just now, so it has worked successfully. And we know that because, as you remember, this was 4, 4, and 1 before, but now it's 4, 5, and 1.25. So it all works very smoothly. This is the main reason I wanted to add the webhook in, so that you've got 2 triggers. One, every morning, it recounts everyone, but at the same time, when somebody is working in, and they update lots of pieces of content, it recounts the client that they are working on. Next, let's continue building the red alert automation that we have started. We have already set up the webhook, and we are passing some information from our previous automation to it. So firstly, let's activate this, and I'm just going to save all of this. And let's run the previous scenario once, so that it passes the information through. So I'm going to come here, and I'm going to go run once. Actually, I realize that now that I've done it with the webhook, I also need to, I also need to run this one. So this is the scheduler. I'm just going to, instead of waiting for the schedule, I'm just going to run it once. Or I could trigger it in ClickUp, it doesn't really matter. But I'm just going to trigger it here, so that makes sure this all runs, which we can see it does. Wait for it to get to the end. And we can see something did go through. So let's open up our red alert automation. And here in the drop down, you can select the run, so the one that just finished, and you can go run once. And this is how you get the information in. So you can now see it has received information, the client name Apple, the folder ID, the health task ID, how many weeks they've got left, the approved content count. So basically everything we have set up to send in the HTTP request in the JSON that we did just a moment ago. The next thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to get the information, the custom fields, from the line in the content health monitor. And the way I'm going to do it in this instance is with ClickUp, and I'm going to use an API call. So I'm going to say make an API call. The URL here will be v2/task/ and then we want to map in the health task ID. I lost my slash there. Enter to apply. There you go. So this is how it knows which task in all of the ClickUp system that I've got it's supposed to look for. It's by this health task ID it received from the previous automation. The method is get, that is correct. The content type, application JSON, everything else remains unchanged. We can just save this one. We will also want to set some variables, and instead of doing it one by one, we can use a tool that sets them multiple at once. So there's a tool for set multiple variables, and there's 2 in particular that I want to set. The first one is shoot booked, and the second one is alert sent. And before I set the values, I will want to use some more information from my second module here. So I'm going to actually let it run one more time. So if I go back here with this run, can't remember which one it was. Oh, it's the same. So run once. Route not found. No wonder, because I'm missing the word task here. Let's try it again. Now it has worked, it has passed something through, and if I go back to my tools, you can see I have now a lot more options from this API call, which is what I wanted, and I wanted to show you what we're looking for. We've got the custom fields here again, but you can see it doesn't really show us all the custom fields that we would expect. It only says one of them, which is weeks of content, and then the ID for it, the type, the date it was created, the value, all of this. But where are the other ones? Well, we need to map those, and that's what we're going to do in a formula here. So the formula I'm going to use is called map. Very simple, like I mentioned, just map. And we are mapping the custom field. We want to get the value out of it. And we need to set the ID of the custom field that we are looking for. So I'm going to go ID, and then I'm going to leave this empty for now because we need to fetch this. So you can see that the ID for weeks of content left is this one, but we need the one for should booked. Well, how can we get it? We can just use the other automation where we already have the data. So if I come back here and I open one of the previous runs, in here where we're getting all the custom fields, you may remember when we did this previously, I can expand this and look for the should booked, which will be here somewhere. There we go. And this time we are looking for the ID of this custom field. So this is the figure, this is the unique identifier I want to copy, and I want to put that here. What this would do is it would map the current field, but it would give me the whole array. What I want is I need just a single value. So I'm going to wrap the whole thing in a formula called first, and just going to end it there, so that it gives me just the first value. And finally, if this is empty, because at the moment all of them are empty, it wouldn't actually return the false value, it would just remain blank, and that's not what we want. So we're just going to simply wrap it in if empty, and then the answer here will be false. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing with the second variable. The only difference is I need to replace the ID. So coming back to my other automation again, I'm looking for the alert sent, which is somewhere here at the top. There we go. I'm going to take the ID here and replace it right here. If I run the scenario now, we can see the output false and false, which is correct. That's what we wanted to achieve because neither of those checkboxes are checked. I will now want to get a ClickUp task based on the data. So get a task based on the task ID from this module. So you can see I already have body ID right here at the top. So that's nice and simple. And I want to insert a filter here to only pass through the ones where should isn't booked and alert isn't sent. So a very simple filter. So now we know that even if we get red client into this automation, we only want to continue down this automation to send an alert if there is no should booked and if there is no alert already sent today. Well, the next thing we want to do is to actually send the alert. And there's multiple ways you can do it. You can post a comment on ClickUp. So let's do that. Let's do ClickUp post a task comment. We will map this to the task ID from my previous module again. And before I add in the text, let me actually run this one more time. Just so that I get the data here, because that's what I was looking for. Not what I wanted to do. There we go. So now I'm mapping this to task ID from the previous task. And you can see it just makes it a lot easier to know which field you're working with because you've got an example of data. So it makes it much easier to navigate. So I'm going to say content alert dash, and I'm going to say task name. So it tells you immediately which client we're talking about. And we can also say weeks of content remaining. Custom fields, weeks of content left. We can say shoot booked, and we already know that this is not true, so we can just say no. And action required, schedule a shoot immediately. We can save that, so that's going to post a comment to that line. You could also make it send an email, so you can just add a simple email module. You want to send an email. Again, if you haven't used this before, you will need to set up your email connection. You can do this separately. Just a caveat, if you are using a personal Gmail account, that can be a little bit tricky because you need to play with some of the authorization. But I'm just going to keep this very simple. I'm just going to send this to myself. Subject, content alert. And I'm actually going to copy the text from here so that it's the same. I'm just going to drop in some break lines. And I can save that. And finally, we just want to make sure that we capture in ClickUp that we have sent the alert. So we're gonna do ClickUp, edit a task with custom field. We want to map the task ID from the module we had right here. So let's go, sorry, from this one that we have already used, so the task ID. And we're just going down to alert sent, and we're going to say yes, save. And that's our next automation done. We can give this a little test run. So once again, with the data we already have in there, you can see it has worked all the way to the end. So if I go back to ClickUp, Apple, you can see it now has the checkbox here that the alert has been sent. I will also have the email in my inbox. You can see it's the first one here, content alert. And we will also have a comment here. So if I click into this, you can see the comment just now, content alert, Apple, weeks of content, short book not, schedule shoot immediately. Let's carry on and create our next automation, which will be the reset at midnight, which is very simple, actually probably the simplest one we will do today. So let's say daily reset. And what we want to do is, now that we have ticked that we have sent the alerts, at the end of the day, we want to reset that checkbox. So what I'm gonna do, I'm going to go ClickUp, list all tasks, and map this again to the content health master. Now I'll want to edit a task with custom fields, and I'm going to map this again correctly. But this time I am mapping the task ID to the task ID I got from my previous module. And all I'm doing here is I'm making sure that the alert send goes to no. So I'm going to save that, save this, change the schedule, make this run daily at midnight. And that's the scenario done. Next, let's build the automation that syncs the shoots booked in our calendar with ClickUp. So the first module in this one will be Google Calendar. So I'm going to search for that. And we are searching for events. Again, if you haven't linked your Google Calendar before, you will need to create a connection here, but I already have this created. Once you have done that, you can choose which calendar you want to pull from. So I recommend having a dedicated calendar just for the shoots, which is what I'm doing here. The start date will be now. So here you can go in date and time functions and you can just drop in the now. And end date, I'm just going to make this look for the next 30 days. So I'm going to use a function called add days. And I'm going to say now 30, not 320, 30. So this will look for the next 30 days through your calendar. That's the Google Calendar module done. But Google Calendar modules work a little bit different than ClickUp modules. So we need to add an extra step here, which is an iterator. This is because in ClickUp, it already outputs everything as bundles. As you have seen, like when we are looking at the results, it came as bundles. But Google Calendar doesn't do this. So we need to make a little bit of data processing to make it happen. So I can just use an iterator, which is from flow control, so one of the built-in functions similar to the tools. And I'm mapping the whole thing, so the very first thing at the top where it says bundle. So that's what I'm using in the array here. So once again, this is because the Google Calendar module would output everything as one single array, but we want to split it out into individual bundles so that we can process all the results we get. The next module we will want to use is a text parser. So I'm just going to search for it, text parser, there you go. And there's lots of different options. What I'm looking for is for a match pattern. And the pattern I'm looking for is this one. You will be able to copy this from the blueprint, but this is essentially saying start at the start of a text, look for everything before the word content shoot. And this will make sure that it's looking for the right thing and it grabs the client name from it. And we also need to set which field it's actually looking for, and it's from the Google Calendar module, it's the summary. I can save that and I can add another text parser. This time I'm looking to replace. And this is very simple. The text I'm replacing is the one that we just created, so it's already matched that pattern. And the pattern it's looking for is this one. This essentially makes sure that it removes spaces at the start or at the end of client's name. In case somebody, press double space or something like that, it just gets rid of it. And I'm going to rename the modules just so I know what I'm working with. So I'm gonna say remove spaces, get client name. Now that we've got the client name, we can use it to get the correct tasks. So I'm going to go into my ClickUp modules again. I'm gonna go list all tasks, and I will want to map it. And the list ID will be equivalent to my last output from the 5th module, the text here. Next, I need to bring into this automation again my tasks from ClickUp. So I'm going to go list all tasks and again select the for the last list and the content health master. And now we want to edit that. So again, edit the task with custom fields. And I will map my task ID to the task ID from the previous module. And what I want to input here is the next shoot date. So I'm looking for that field at the very bottom. You can see it here. And so this will come from my Google Calendar module and it will be the start. Just like so, we can save that. The next thing we need to do to make sure this works properly is we need to add another filter and a few conditions here. We want to match the shoot and client name to make sure we are processing the right data. So firstly, I want to make sure that the processed client name with removed spaces equals to the name of the client in my final task. We also want to make sure that the new shoot we are trying to add in, so the start, is before one that is already in there. So for example, if you already had a record for a shoot booked, but you booked an earlier one, we want to update that. But otherwise, we don't really want to use a later date. So that's why this condition is here. So this is the first couple of conditions, but this would only work if there is some sort of a shoot date for the client. If there isn't one, this wouldn't pass through. So we need to add an exception for that. So I'm gonna add an or rule, and I'm going to say or if the next shoot date, and I'm gonna say here, does not exist, which means you don't need to add anything else. And then again, you need to add the end rule that equals the first condition from there. So you want to make sure that this text is equal to the task name. And that's the next automation done. So let me save this. Let me add a shoot into this calendar, let's say for the next Monday. And I'm gonna say Apple content shoot. I'm going to save that. Actually, I wanted to add some time to it because it's probably not an all-day thing. So I'm gonna say, yeah, 10 till 2:30, doesn't really matter. So it's in my calendar and we can test this scenario. You can see there's no errors here, it has worked successfully. And if I go back to ClickUp, you can see it populated with Monday, which is the next shoot date, which is correct. It's on Monday. So yeah, another automation done. And now that we have started syncing our calendar with ClickUp, we also need to add the final automation, which is cleansing past shoot dates. So let's go back to make and create our final scenario today. So once again, I want to get all tasks from my master. And now I essentially want to delete the next shoot date and the shoot booked checkbox. So the way I'm going to do this is again with a ClickUp API call. And we can address those fields directly. So if I just type in v2/task/task ID, this gets me to the correct client, but then I can also specify the correct field I want to use, if it lets me. There you go. And now how to get the correct field? Well, again, I need to use the unique identifier, which once again, we can grab from our previous automation. So I'm going back to my content count automation, and I'm again going to run it with some previous data just so I have something in here. There you go. And what I'm looking for is the ID of next shoot date. So I go custom fields, next shoot date, so I can grab the ID from here and I can just paste it into my URL. The method is going to be post because we are passing some data in, and the body is going to be very simple because we want to make sure this gets deleted. We're just going to say value null. So I'm going to rename this to know what, so that I know what it's doing. So it's remove next shoot date. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing for shoot booked. So this is essentially going to remove both of the fields, but we only want to do that in certain conditions. So let's add a filter at the very start. And I'm going to call this next shoot date in the past. And essentially, I want to make sure, firstly, that the next shoot date is already filled in. So in my custom fields, next shoot date, and I'm gonna say greater than 0. And I also want to make sure that it's in the past. So next shoot date is earlier than now. And that's our final automation done. So I'm just now going to go back through my automations and make sure they are set up in the right chronological order that I wanted them to run. The first thing that has to run is the past shoots cleanse. So I'm going to make this a scheduled for daily, let's say at 6 AM. The next thing I want to happen is the calendar sync. So I'm going to say that this can happen daily at 6:10. When that's done, I want the content count to run, but if you remember, this will not be triggered here, but in my daily trigger. So this one will be set to run daily at, not at 6, because we want it to run after the previous two, so let's say 6:20. The red alert gets triggered automatically. That's not a scheduled one. It gets triggered if some data is passed to it. So you can see that that's already active. And then the final one is the daily reset, which I think I have already scheduled for daily at midnight. So we can now have a little play to test all of this. So for example, if I change the posts per week here to 2 in Apple, it should automatically change how this gets processed. So firstly, let's run the daily reset. I'm gonna pretend that it's midnight and I want to run this once. So that should get rid of the alerts and checkbox here, which it has done. The next thing that would run would be the calendar shoot. We have done it recently, but just so that we can do some, just so that we can see something, let me move this to Sunday, so it should update. So if I run the calendar shoot sync now, that should work as well. You can see this has been updated to tomorrow. We then want to run the count, so let me just run the daily trigger quickly. And that should hopefully change the, yes, you can see this is now Ember. You can see it's got 2.5 weeks of content left, just because we have changed the amount of posts per week they require. It would also work if we change how many pieces of approved content they've got, right? So I'm conscious we haven't really looked at the content pipeline for each client that much. But it's because this is basically where you will do your work, but the automation doesn't touch it that much. But I can move all of this. So let's say this goes to production. This goes to back to idea. This goes back to ready for review, for example. So now we only have 2 pieces of content. We can run the count again. So I'm going to come back here. And let's trigger it one more time. And you can see this changes to red. It changes the amount of content left. And it fires off an alert because it says shoot is not booked. So actually that's a problem with one of our automations, which we need to fix. So in the calendar shoot thing, I completely forgot that I also need to change the shoot booked to yes, which is right here. So don't forget to do that because that's messing things up a little bit. But at least we know that everything else is working because we got the red alert. Like I mentioned previously, there's lots of things how you can make this look differently on ClickUp. So for example, you've got the board view here, where in this instance it's set by status, but if I change this to go by content health instead, you then all of a sudden have every single client by red, amber, green. And I know I haven't really covered like the other clients, they are just here kind of empty, but that's because I'm realizing this video is going way too long. Now that everything is set up, it's just simply copying and pasting the one folder and making it another client, and it will scale. So now the whole system is built. Every morning, Make will wake up, check between your calendar and ClickUp, update the next shoots, and shout at you if anything is wrong. You don't have to lift a finger. The beauty of building it this way is that it scales. Adding a new client is simply the case of copying and pasting the existing folder with the content pipeline. The only other thing you need to do is you need to make sure that you add a line in the master dashboard as well. As I mentioned, I built a blueprint of how to build this system step by step, and I'm giving it for you for free. You can grab it from the link in the description below. If you got value from this, hit the subscribe button, as I'm going to build more of these systems and automations so that you can follow along. And if you actually build this, let me know down in the comments. I would genuinely love to see that this is being used and saving you from this nightmare scenario where a client runs dry of content and you haven't even noticed. Anyway, I hope you found this useful. Feel free to check out one of my other videos, and I'll see you in the next one.